for sticking around till the very end of this. I'm surprised the room is as full as it is. I was thinking it was just going to be the five, originally six of us talking to each other in a room by ourselves, but here we are. If you'll notice, we're missing one of our speakers. Romain emailed me about 30 minutes ago saying he was sick, so now we're one short. But the idea for this panel originally came up when I was talking to him and Gabe, actually. I think we were at droidCon Italy, or Android Makers, one of the European conferences around that time. And I had just stepped down out of management, and Romain and I were having this really interesting conversation around what it means to have like a career level at your company, one where you can just sit there forever and then retire, and that's okay. And Gabe had a lot of opinions on that too. And we kind of just decided at the time, hey, this would be a really interesting conversation to like publicize in some way. And so here we are. I have a lot of great panelists here. I'll let them introduce themselves. Lien, why don't you start? Please introduce yourself. Tell us a bit about your path to where you are and the scope of the responsibilities and leadership that you have.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lien Mamitsuka. I am a director of engineering at Twitter. So I am one of the few managers up here on the panel. Just curious how many folks in the room are managers? Who would I be able to relate to here? Yes. One who's raised his hand
half.
What about previous managers?
Previous managers?
All right.
Oh, there you go.
Awesome. So to talk a little bit about my path and how I got to Director of Engineering at Twitter. Started out, college, when I think about BS in computer science. After college, I worked at a variety of small companies and startups and was doing a lot of back-end work at that time. And then in 2009, I was working at Motorola Mobility, and I was doing Java Web Services. And then at the time, Android was just starting out, and there was an opening for Android development on the client team. And I was really curious about what it would be like to sort of like develop and have more tangible experience with what I was building. And that's why I made the switch into Android. And then in 2011, I joined Twitter as the third Android engineer on the team. And throughout the years, I found myself in a variety of tech lead roles, both on the main app as well as Periscope and Fabric. And then in 2017, the team was growing on the Periscope side, and I was asked to step into a management role. It took me 6 months before I finally said yes. And then my scope and responsibilities just increased over time. So I started managing in 2017, and now I'm managing a set of managers. And our teams are responsible for creating all the tools and experiences that you see on Twitter for the content itself, like tweets, videos, live streaming on Periscope. And when I think about my scope of leadership, I guess it's like an org basically serving 8 engineering managers and about 70 engineers. So it's pretty good size org.
Great, thanks. Gabe, what about you?
Yeah, so my name's Gabriel Peal, and I'm a principal Android engineer at Tonal, which is a fitness startup here in San Francisco. So currently at Tonal, I sort of have shared responsibilities, more a dotted line managerial role with the rest of the Android team of 8. So we do split one-on-ones, and I have a large role in determining the technical roadmap and helping the whole team grow and become a part of that. My path getting to this point was I'd started at General Motors, where I did some embedded systems for the Chevy Volt. And then after that, worked again in automotive on Android Auto at Google. So that was my first foray into the Android world, getting that team off the ground. So it was about 5 people when I started and some whiteboard sketches. And then we saw that all the way through to the point where Android Auto was in dealerships around the country and now around the world. Then following that, I did Android and React Native at Airbnb. So worked on a variety of roles from product to infrastructure, help try to make React Native a thing there. And we got very far. And then, as many of you may know, we have rolled some of that back. But that's not to say it wasn't successful in a lot of ways. But did a variety of Android things and React Native things, as well as some open source projects. So I'm the sort of the owner and maintainer of Lottie for Android and a co-maintainer of Mavericks. So that's sort of the path that took me to Tonal today.
Thanks. Shasha.
Hi, I'm Shasha Chu. I'm the Android platform tech lead at Pinterest. I started my career in game development, actually. I wanted to go into computer graphics, and my math wasn't good enough, so I ended up in game development. I was at EA for 7 years. I made some very good games and some very bad games. And then I think I was there for so long, I was there for 7 years, that I decided that I needed to leave. Otherwise, I would never leave. So I had a friend who was working at a small mobile games startup, and he said that they were having a lot of trouble hiring Android engineers. And so he said, instead of trying to find someone who has Android experience, maybe we should just hire someone who's competent, who can probably learn Android. So that was my exposure to Android, doing game development for about a year. And then I left that startup and was at OnLive for 4 years, which was Google Stadia before Stadia was cool. And then that startup failed also. So actually the same friend who recruited me to the mobile games company had since moved on to Pinterest. And he heard that I was looking. So I like to say I kind of snuck my way onto the Android team there. And I was just an IC for a while. I became the product tech lead after a couple years. And then about 18 months ago, they were looking to sort of create these platform tech lead roles on iOS, web, and Android. And I like to say I was the most competent person that nobody hated. So I became the platform tech lead. So as far as the scope of my responsibility, basically pretty much what you would expect, which is, I'm responsible for setting the technical direction of the platform at Pinterest. So both kind of from the pinner side and from the developer side.
Thank you. Joe.
Hey guys, I'm Joaquim Verges. I'm currently the Android tech lead at Twitch. We're a team of 15 Android engineers roughly. I'm setting the technical direction there. I've been there for 2.5 years. Before that, I was at Twitter, actually overlapped with Lien a little bit and Ty, and did that for 2 years. Before that, that was actually my first job in the US. It was a little startup in Palo Alto called Up There. Always Android. I consider myself like a product engineer, so I really like making products, making Android apps. So much so that even after work, I always do side projects, and you might know me for some of the apps that I created, which is actually what got me to the US in the first place. Before the US, I was working in France, in Paris. That's where I grew up. And I started, my first Android opportunity was in a little agency that was one of the very few that were doing mobile at the time. That was about like 9 years ago. And I came to the interview with a little app that I made and I published. It was a news app. And they were really impressed with that. And they gave me a chance. And that's how I started learning Android. And so did that and kept doing my side projects until I got noticed, got brought out here, and now I'm leading this team of 15 people at Twitch.
Thanks. And I'm Ty Smith. I've been doing Android for almost 12 years now. I got my start because I was a back-end developer who got roped into an Android project when no one else would do it. And was told to learn and ship in 3 months. And after that, I was hooked on a very terrible tool chain in IDE at the time. But it became much, much better over time. Mm-hmm. But it was a very exciting community, and everything was new. And I stuck through that and worked at a variety of really cool companies. I worked at Evernote. I worked at Twitter on the Fabric tools. And I've been a Uber for about 4 years now. I've spent some time on our external developer platform. I spent a lot of time on our internal mobile platform where we build tools and libraries and everything else to support all of our hundreds of Android and iOS engineers. I've spent about 1.5 years managing on that side, being a TLM, which is a half IC, half manager. And then this year I switched back to being just a regular engineer, and it's been great. And now I tech lead a few of our projects, including the Kotlin standardization for all of our Android engineers and all our open source projects. So moving on a little bit, I bet a lot of folks here have very different day-to-days with these different roles that we have. So why don't a few of you tell me about your day-to-day? We can start with Lien.
Yeah, so I like to think it varies depending on what season is. Sometimes we have planning season, then we have comp season, then review season. I just finished planning season for planning 2020, but on a regular day-to-day thing, I like to start my day thinking about how I'm gonna spend the day. So the night before, I do bullet journaling. I don't know if anybody here does it, but I spend that time to think about what is my day gonna look like? What are some of the key things that I need to get out of the day? I like to try to visualize success for that. Majority of my day is spent in meetings. As a manager, I spend a lot of time in like staff meetings, planning meetings, review meetings, one-on-ones to build relationships with people and partners across the business aligning on what our priorities are. Outside of that, we're also dealing with escalation sometimes. There's incidents that happen that I have to help attend to as well, severity incidents, personnel issues sometimes as well. I do a lot of hiring as well. We're hiring for our team, so I'm spending a lot of time on interviews and a lot of outreach, as well as participating in huddles to make sure that those are fair and consistent. And on top of that, trying to have fun in between all those things too, and laughing with my team as much as possible as well. There's a lot of things that feel like, we can get so caught up in, the day-to-day of work and things like that, running between meetings, and there's definitely times where it feels like it's just, in and out, but I try to make time for those little moments too.
Thank you. Do you get to code at all?
I do not get to code. I'd say the last time I did any coding was in March when I made a change to a build script, and I was really happy because I was able to do that on my own.
Gabe, how about you?
Yeah, and of course it varies a lot for me as well, but I think that the most important part of my day, I would say, is when I take a shower in the morning. It's about 15 minutes every morning where I am relaxed and I really think about what my goals are for that day. It's the time I use to process what I did the previous day and then think about where we are as a team, where we are either in our sprint or our release or our quarter or our year, and try to understand. And I think there's something about, there's a reason why there's that subreddit, shower thoughts. I think that there's something magical about the shower, and it gives you an opportunity to really process what you want to do that day. So I highly recommend you try it. You don't have to think about work in the shower if you don't want, but I find that time is actually really useful. And so I'm not going to go into the 40 different permutations of a day, but that time gives me the creativity and understanding to know what I want to do.
That's interesting. So far, we have two different planning for success at the very beginning of the day in a very explicit way.
Yeah, bullet journaling, shower, similar concepts though, I think.
Preparation is key to success.
Yeah, I mean, raise your hand if you found yourself, you're like, we're engineers, we get really excited about specific ideas. And I find myself doing this a lot where I'm halfway through the day and then I start yak shaving an idea or going down the rabbit hole on something else. And then all of a sudden I spent 4 hours coding something that wasn't originally part of the plan. And had I at any point taken a step back, I probably realized that it wasn't actually the highest priority thing to work on that time. And had I maybe just given myself a breather and really thought about prioritization, and importantly, something that doesn't get factored in is the opportunity cost of that time, what's not going to get done as a result of doing this other thing. It really helps to actually give yourself that mental space to plan.
Shasha, how about your day?
I sound like a disaster compared to all of you.
These guys are
I have 2 young kids, 5.5 and 2.5. So my day starts with utter chaos. And actually, my commute to work, which is on Caltrain, is the most relaxing part of my day. It's kind of a nice transition between home and work. As for my work day, I think I mentioned that I have family and I have kids, and I really prioritize them. So I think I'm actually at the office fewer than 8 hours, but I have maybe 7.5 really, really, really focused hours. When I started my career in the games industry, then I was in the office from 10 until 10, and probably spent 4 to 5 of those hours having coffee, playing games, like waiting for the build. I think that becoming a parent has really helped me focus at work, because I know that I only have this very, very short amount of time at work. I would say that I spend more time than I should coding, because it's what we love to do. I think my boss, he tries to tell me that it's actually the least important part of my job, which I think is very true, which is I can be a 10x engineer, but I can't be 10x engineers. I think I'm basically the point person for anything around the Android platform. So, for example, if there's some external partner that wants to talk to us, I'm in that meeting. If there's something on fire on the platform, I'm there also. So I'm really kind of all over the place. And then I kind of like to fit in coding whenever I can.
Okay. Great. So one of the important parts of being a leader in these different roles is helping to set the technical vision for those working around you or under you. How do you all think about that? How do you think about setting the technical vision for your team or your org? Joe, why don't you start with this?
Yeah, so this is actually a really important point, because I feel like as tech leads or managers as well, one of the things we're responsible is actually set up a culture in the team, technical culture. And one ways that I found successful is my favorite meeting. Usually I don't like meetings, but this one is my favorite meeting. We do it every Monday, and it's an Android developers only meeting. There's no managers there, and people bring their own topics, and we try to kind of give time to speak for everybody and kind of bring their problems, something they encountered, or something they found on a blog post that they want to talk about. And it's my favorite meeting because we always come out of it like really inspired to do something better for our code base or for the team process sometimes, code reviews, etc. And that's been, I found, the most successful thing. Just get together, only engineers, no managers. As soon as you put one manager in the room, the topic completely changes and people kind of get more rigid. But if it's just talking technical and being between ourselves and trying, also putting an emphasis of we're here to have fun as well, suddenly like people start loosening up and talking and expressing their frustrations too, and it's a safe place to do it. And that's gone a long way to set up that culture of let's try to make our app better and our process better ourselves, not wait for a manager to tell us what to do.
Yeah, at Airbnb we did something really similar, and I think this is a great idea for any size team, is to just get the engineers working on a platform to have that sense of community and ownership over that platform.
And especially if you're split in product teams,
Yes.
which happens a lot, even in small companies I've seen. Sometimes you lose touch with your other coworkers on the same platform that work on the same code base. So it's really important to gather up and kind of exchange these ideas.
I couldn't agree more, yeah.
Gabe, how does that differ from your experience in the bigger company to moving to a smaller startup?
Yeah, so I've sort of seen the whole range from a 2-person Android team all the way up to 70. And that sense of ownership is really so key. I think that hits on it really well. And it's really important that people feel that sense of ownership over the platform. You're all working together on an app, and sometimes you're all product teams, sometimes you're a platform team, and sometimes you're product teams with kind of a horizontal platform team underneath. Different companies will have different structures, but getting people together and feel that sense of ownership is important. You can kind of see this in secondary ways. So Airbnb is one of those fortunate companies that offers food. So everyone goes and gets lunch with somebody. And when it was just an Android platform team, the Android team would always get lunch together. And then when that team split into feature teams, we tried to hold on to a piece of that. We actually had like a recurring calendar invite for once a week. And as the team grew, fewer and fewer people attended those meetings, or those lunches rather. And so doing something to enable people to feel ownership over the platform is really important. And then another thing I'd say is just as if you feel like you're a technical leader on the team, help share that with other people. So you can do that either explicitly, so we use Slack, as I imagine many of you do, but we set up an Android links Slack channel, and everyone who contributes to Android is on that. And anytime anybody finds something interesting, or is at Airbnb, it's called Android Reading. So you just post a link to it. So it's news, and like this is how you stay up to date. Maybe you just followed someone really interesting on Twitter, you can post that, or even just a specific tweet. Help other people get comfortable with the Android community, the Android platform, and then they can feel a part of the platform within your company.
I feel like it's especially important with Android because I imagine it's the case, I think, at a lot of companies in Silicon Valley. It's certainly the case at Pinterest that there's a very, very heavy iOS bias. I think if you look at the leadership of your company, I can almost guarantee that all of them are holding iOS devices.
Yes.
So no matter how many times you bring up like the DAUs chart, then I think I feel like in a lot of ways Android doesn't get the attention that it deserves. And so I think if you're not careful, then that can sort of leak into the psyche of the people who are working on the platform, where they say, oh, like we're not important, we're not. So I think part of it is really just keeping people excited about the platform. And honestly, I think that's sort of part of why sort of the Android community as a whole is so strong, is because it was almost this sort of homegrown effort where it was like these crazy like square devices, and there was track balls, and you're just like, what is happening? But it was just something that was kind of like built out of just like labor of love of all of these people. And I think that sort of like in a microcosm happens in all of these Silicon Valley companies where I think it's like the Android people, I think you just sort of have to quietly do your work. And then like I said, you sort of have to prove yourself sometimes in that company. And so I think it's really important to have that sense of community inside your companies, especially as they scale.
And I see that as a good thing in a lot of companies. Yeah. I think I would echo everything that you said from my experience at Airbnb. But I think that did create a really unique culture on the Android team, because we were kind of the little guys that no one really paid attention to, but A, it gave us a sense of ownership, and B, it allowed us to do some fun, creative things that iOS would be under more scrutiny for. So we could be a little bit more aggressive about shipping experiments or Easter eggs. My last commit at Airbnb was an Easter egg, and it lasted an entire year before somebody found it. But yeah, you can do stuff like that, and I think that you wouldn't have that kind of freedom if you're under the eyes of everyone. So since we're all here and we are in the Android community, let's make it a silver lining, and let's make the most out of it.
Lien, as a director, as one of those untrustworthy managers now, how do you think about the technical direction? And a lot of the stuff we're hearing is like very grassroots or on the ground. How do you think about contributing that from the top?
So yeah, I think there's a lot of times there's this misconception that directors or the higher up you go, the more responsible you are for setting, the vision for the team. And I like to think that I'm doing that in partnership with like tech leads and the community, the engineering community at the company. And so what that really looks like is, asking a lot of questions of my tech leads and the communities and business partners, like, what are some of the challenges that we're facing? What are some of the problems that we are dealing with right now that's preventing us from delivering customer value? Because at the end of the day, that's really what we care about. And so being there to sort of like poke holes and like challenge folks and give people the space to think about those problems, I think that's where I add value. I think I'm really there as a facilitator to help with that. But once we have sort of like an idea that we want to run with, then it's my job to sort of advocate for that for my team and make sure that leadership is bought into that and make sure that we had the support and the funding that we need to enable all those things. So once we have that from the top, everybody's aligned on this vision, then I really am just empowering my tech leads to go run with it, but also making sure I'm holding them accountable. Like, at the end of the day, we do have to make sure we're delivering to the business. And so I am checking in with my tech leads. Hey, how are things going? Do we need more support? Do we need to make some adjustments? And just be really clear and upfront about what is involved in doing all that work. And so I think about a lot of the responsibility on my side is like inwardly to my team, making sure I'm asking the right questions to facilitate a lot of the thinking there. And then outwardly making sure I'm advocating and making visible that work so that people understand why we need to make these technical investments, why this work is important, because if I don't do that, then you only hear the product side of the world.
I think that brings up a really good point, and that's a common conversation is how do you balance the trade-offs of those product requirements that are coming in versus the scalable tech that a lot of engineers want to build. Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think that we're reaching a kind of a golden age in Android where we have quite a modern stack now with Kotlin and a variety of reactive frameworks and about 1 million blog posts about how to modularize your app. And so there's a lot of things that you can do and just kind of lay the foundation that don't actually take a ton of work up front. Anytime you spend reading and learning about architecture and whatnot will pay dividends, probably 10x or 100x for the future. And so I think that especially seeing some larger apps that may not have considered what it looks like to scale at the beginning, they kind of get bit by that a little bit later. But it becomes, again, an opportunity cost thing. Like if you, depending on the size of the app that you're working on, you have to consider how complex do you think it might get, how big do you think it might get, and what are the chances of that versus how do I make sure that we even survive as a company long enough to get there. So it's a little bit of both. You have to kind of find the line that makes sense for your company. So don't ignore architecture because there's a lot of things that you can do at very little cost.
Shasha, you're in a platform team, so I'm assuming you might scale one way a little heavier with bias. Why don't you tell me a little bit about your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, so the Pinterest Android app first shipped in 2012. Recycler View didn't exist, so I think the Android team was 1 and then 2 people. He wrote his sort of own adapter and essentially a layout manager to do that sort of, kind of our iconic staggered Pinterest grid. Now that's approximately 2 lines of code with the Recycler View and a staggered grid layout manager. So, I guess my point being that we're dealing with a lot of tech debt because, I think, like Gabe was saying, then those choices that were made at the time, I think both in the interest of speed, and I think just because the team was so small, I think we're running into that wall right now. So obviously, I think I'm trying to sort of steer the ship towards thinking more long term, making investments now that will pay off later. That all said, I think that if you build the coolest framework in the world and none of the developers want to use it, then what's the point? Nobody's going to open up Pinterest and they're like, wow, that framework, it's so amazing. So like one of our core company values is put pinners first, which is I think probably all of you have a similar value, which is essentially that like the users are king. And so it's, like it always has to be at the service of the product that we're building. So one strategy I think on the platform team that we found a lot of success with is that, if there's a problem that you need to solve, then basically find a customer first, customer in this case being another developer team, and work with them to actually build a feature on your new framework. And so I think this accomplishes a couple of things, which is number one, I think if you're actually building something real, then you figure out all of the edge cases that you didn't think about when you made your 20-page technical design document. And then number two, I think it's like you build up that kind of that trust and that goodwill with the product teams, where you're really working closely with them and listening to them. And then at the end, you have a real feature that's it's proven to be working on this new framework. And so I think it's sells itself, I guess, in the sense that hey, we built this feature. Look at the code. You can see it yourself. Look how it's working. It's performant, et cetera. And so we found a lot of success with that sort of model where you kind of find a customer and then work with them to build from the bottom up.
Yeah, but I'm gonna add a little bit to that. But I think that there's some concrete things that are really easy, and it's not always easy to. They don't directly leads to like a customer value or something like that. But it's more in line with like there are some things you can do that are easy. So in the name of giving concrete examples, one of the things that we sort of instituted as a cultural thing, both at Airbnb and Tonal, is the green gutter culture. So IntelliJ has a ton of warnings that it checks for. Some of them are powered by Lint, some are not. But just having a culture that the right gutter has 0 warnings, and there's a little green check mark on the top of all your files. There isn't actually static analysis to catch all of those, but making that part of your culture and navigating through a code base where all the files are green in IntelliJ is so nice, and it just like implicitly builds this really strong culture. And then there's a number of like little things like setting up things like detect and KT lint. It doesn't take very long, and it reaps benefits forever. Not only does it make your code base consistent and readable for everyone, but I think one of the key things that it allows is while you're doing pull requests or pull reviews, code reviews, it's really easy for someone to fool themselves that they did the right job just because they found some style nits. When in fact that's something that computers are really good at. What we're good at is understanding the structure of code and the architecture. And so if you know that the computer and CI will always catch those nits, it forces you to actually consider, are they doing the right thing? Does the architecture make sense? So take the time and put in place just a few of those. Like make sure lint is running, get detect in CLI, green gutter, and that will reap benefits forever.
Joaquim, as a self-identified product engineer, do you think any different about this?
Yeah, I have a lot of good examples on this. One thing that I see all the time, and honestly, we're all kind of a little bit guilty of it, but product usually comes with deadlines. And deadlines means sometimes you gotta cut corners. But in fact, like I think, Gabriel, like you had a really good point that these days with the stack that we have, you can actually make a feature really clean, really fast. So sometimes there's time management issues or distractions or something that made you cut those corners. But I've had a little too many times where I do a code review and I have a lot of opinions on why this shouldn't be this way. And the answer I get is, I have a deadline, I need to merge this because my manager told me so. And what I always do is I go to that manager and I try to make the case for it. Like, yes, this might work and maybe it is the deadline, but I can like list 10 ways that it's gonna break in like 2 months and we're gonna have to spend more time on it. And usually managers take that pretty well. If we have a good relationship between tech lead and manager, I think that's where you can really make time for just doing the little extra mile, and not only works, but it's a good foundation for building on top of it. That's really important, I think. And I found that after giving that feedback multiple times and giving the feedback to the manager too, now the managers when they were starting the feature, were always like making sure there was time for kind of testing and like just general design before starting to code, etc. And little by little, we're getting there. In fact, actually, product deadlines in our kind of companies, they're usually self-imposed. Like if it is 1 week later or 2 weeks later, unless like there's a massive marketing campaign behind it and stuff, you can usually get away with that extra week. And that makes so much more difference because one, it's scalable, you can build on top of it, there's less bugs, and two, you're more proud of what you built. And I think like just giving that culture of like, be proud of what you build. If you build something, you know it's kind of shaky and you're shipping it, but then you've already gone on to the next feature, that's gonna, at least for me, and that's what I try to share with my teammates, is that that's gonna haunt you back in a few months, and you know you're gonna have to fix it. And you don't want to have to fix a code that you know is bad. So why not do the extra mile while you're in it, while it's still warm in your head, redesign the system a little bit so that you know it's gonna be easy to work with for everybody.
Yeah, taking the time to really think about it is so important. I think we've all gotten caught where we like build something and we realize kind of at the end that the spec or what we're building towards doesn't make sense, or it's missing all these edge cases, and then you have to go back and reconsider it from the beginning. So be your own advocate. I think one of the hallmark traits of senior and above engineers is that they actually consider the spec. They consider or what they're building towards. They consider what it's missing. They think about the user, and they put together an entire picture of where they're trying to go before they start. And not only can that save you a lot of time, but it usually leads to a place where you get it right the first time, or with only a few iterations after that, and everybody wins after that. And so especially be your own advocate. If your manager's like, I need this done at the end of the week, and you're like, it's going to take a week and a half. It's going to take 2 weeks to do this right. You have to speak up for yourself, or nobody will.
Yeah.
As leaders on our teams, we're responsible both to teach people to do that and to also advocate for them. And a lot of that comes down to mentorship, right? And that's a lot of what our jobs come down to. So I'd ask, how is mentoring folks vary? Like how is mentoring a senior engineer different than a junior engineer? Different than maybe a new grad or someone that's coming out of a boot camp or very entry level.
So I think that it can be broken down in a few different categories. So if you're mentoring someone who's either new to Android or new to software engineering in general, then a lot of the work is going to be around raising their baseline skills, kind of the more rote skills, like getting familiar with the language, getting familiar with the platform APIs and the paradigm, and really just helping them get comfortable so then they can get their job done. But then at a certain point, they'll be comfortable with that. They'll know how to help themselves. They'll know how to learn. They'll be up to date with what the latest and greatest technology is. And then it's really about, are they building the right thing? Are they spending their time becomes the most valuable thing? Are they investing that in the right place? And then eventually, are they then helping the rest of their team grow? And so it's almost like a pay it forward thing. You're always looking back and making sure that you're leaving a wide wake behind you where everyone is helping everyone else grow.
I would add to that I feel like mentoring is a lot about getting to know the person, because everybody will have their areas where you need to help them on. I have this example where we had this intern this summer. She had very little Android experience, but she had that curiosity and always wanted to learn, and was always setting up one-on-ones to me to teach me about Dagger, teach me about RxJava, etc. And so that's where the kind of foundation Android came in. But then there was other people way more experience in the team, which were doing good work, but they were doing it in a way that maybe was a little bit too much their way, or a little bit too complex for the rest of the team. And they needed a different kind of mentorship. They needed the mentorship of kind of get empathy for the other team members. Like, we're working with people who have much less experience than you, or like interns. Think about the code that you're putting out there. Would they understand it? Could they contribute to it and reformat it, etc.? And so that's a type of mentorship too. And so I found that it's really just about kind of like human understanding, and kind of figure out what the right button you can push to make that person an overall better engineer and better team member.
Lien, as a director, you're probably doing a lot more high-level mentorship of more senior folks, other managers. How does that vary?
Yeah, I think the further you go in your career, I think a lot of it is asking bigger picture questions and not specific to focusing on skills or raising foundational baseline skills. So a lot of times, I think going back to what Joaquim said, it takes getting to know the person, because you really do need to tailor that mentorship to the person's own experiences, their motivations. And I've learned that there's not a set list of questions you can ask people to get to that. It's like a series of one-on-ones that I'm going to have, interactions that I've had, something I picked up on in some meeting that we've had, and it helps me understand really what's important to that person and what they're trying to get, what are they wanting to do next. And for some folks, that mentorship can be very specific to how do I get better at leading teams, or how do I get better at influence folks, and trying to figure out what that is. And then what are the areas that I can expose them to those things? And is it helping make an introduction or a connection for them so that they can grow their ability to influence because they're now in a room with other leaders at Twitter talking about those bigger decisions? Or is it like something I want to try to help them with, develop a new skill? So I need to find that opportunity to expose them to that on the job, stretch assignment kind of thing, or educational opportunities. So a lot of it is having conversations with that. I may not also be the best person to mentor them as well, and knowing when I am not the right person, then I can also make an introduction elsewhere. And a lot of times, going back to just general time management, time is pretty much the most important resource we have. So I'm very thoughtful about how I spend my time. And when I am wanting to mentor someone, I'm thinking about how I can help that person. I mentioned sometimes I might not be the best fit, but there are also other folks who I know who have multiple mentors, and I may just be one of 5. So if there's another person who doesn't have any mentors, I will lean into that because they're going to need it most. So I think about that a lot. I have a lot of peer mentorships as well, being fairly new to management and at this level too. I lean on a lot of other folks to help me get through the stuff that I'm going through right now, get advice and guidance and keep me grounded. Mentors outside of the industry as well. I think that's really critical. I think a lot of us live in a tech bubble, so it's nice to have mentors who are not in the tech industry, and they keep me grounded about what is real and what is important in life. So wide range of mentorship that I think of.
Shasha, you mentioned before we were here that you're involved in like apprenticeship programs at Pinterest. How is mentoring an apprentice engineer different than what else we're hearing today?
Sure. Yeah. I was a mentor for our. Actually, she's an Android engineer now. For our first class of apprentices at Pinterest, which was, I think, about 3 years ago. And so we had no idea what we were doing. We sat in a room and we said, how do we interview? So I have opinions on this also, but basically, a lot of interviewing in the tech industry is about data structures, algorithms, like really things that you learn in a 4-year CS program. And so, given that a lot of these people are explicitly not having that background, so how do we, we can't use any of the questions that we usually use, which I think it was good. I think it forces you to think a little bit more critically about what skills are you actually trying to get at. So, for example, we ended up asking a question that eventually had to do with sort of image caching, which really, it's sort of, do you know what a hash map is? If not, this is what it does, and then sort of talking a little bit about the implementation, and then how would you use that to build this? And that's really a lot closer to the skills that we actually want from somebody, which is, not did you take a class on hash maps and caches, but do you understand the fundamentals of what they are and how to use them? So, I think it just from day one, then it was just sort of rethinking the way that we hire. And so once we had, a small class on campus, then I think, again, it was just really, I think, challenging our own assumptions about sort of what skills a person might have when they show up at the company. A lot of these people, I think they had jobs in other industries. So I think from sort of like just working in a professional setting, being organized, et cetera, they were, I would say maybe ahead of a lot of our new grads, but in terms of, maybe they had never used source control before, maybe they've never worked on a really large team on a large code base. So, for example, we gave a project that was far too large to her for her first project, and then we didn't sort of realize at the beginning, because I think it was more something that you might give someone who maybe was a new grad or something. So I think a lot of it is just. I think a little bit what Joe said is that you're very, very much forced to think individually rather than kind of paint these broad brushes about what the type of person is that's going to come on. So, I think overall it was really positive for us, and I think it has brought a lot to our team. But it's I think it's something that it's very, very important that you find the right teams and the right people, because I think sometimes people view apprenticeships as sort of, like super cheap labor, and they're not. I think it's a really bad experience for both, because they're not equipped to give the support that apprentices need, and then apprentices are we're basically setting them up to fail. So I think it's really. It was a really challenging thing, and like I said, I think we made thousands of mistakes, but hopefully we learned from 500 of them and did a little better each time.
One tip I'd have for all of you on this concept of mentorship is, one, recognize that you're never too senior to have a mentor, and then two, think about someone who could be your mentor who's not your current boss. It could be a previous boss, or someone else you've worked with, or even someone you haven't. Someone you've seen at something like a conference, or an executive at another company, or anyone that you know. And then reach out to them and ask explicitly if they'll be your mentor. And you'd be surprised how many people actually say yes to that. And once you do, set up a regular cadence with them, and then make a list for yourself. It could be Google Keep, Google Docs, something like that, where at any point, if you're like, this is something that's on my mind, I want to talk to my mentor, make a note of it. Because the biggest mistake you can have is to have a bunch of great things to talk about and then forget them all right when you're about to meet with them. So just have a list, you can contribute to it, and then as soon as you meet with them, you can talk about whatever the best thing was that you had to talk about over the period.
This might be, I might be setting myself up for failure here, but who in this room has someone that they think of as their mentor? I see a lot of people without their hands up. And like Gabe said, no one is too senior to have a mentor. I would encourage you to pursue that direction.
Who is mentoring someone right now in your team?
I'd like to see more hands raised.
Yeah, having a good mentor is honestly the best thing to progress in the career. Like, just you made me think like who were my mentors back in the day, and that I learned everything from them. Like, it's thanks to them that I'm here today. So super important.
We've talked a lot about like the different types of levels so far, but kind of implicitly we talked about apprentice and new grad engineers. We've thrown around senior and principal and staff engineers. How does your company think about levels before the terminal level, then the terminal level itself, and then what does it mean to be above that?
Yeah, I have a little example there. So my situation here is a little weird for me, because I feel like as an IC, I'm getting to a point where I have to make a choice to either, so we're in the Amazon leveling system, and the next level for me is, I think like the equivalent of staff or principal. And I met with a lot of principal engineers at Twitch and at Amazon to kind of understand what they were doing and if that's something that I would enjoy. And they all told me, forget about coding. If you're coding, you're not doing your job. And that really resonated in a bad way with me. Like my day-to-day is still maybe like 70% coding, and I want to keep it that way. That's what I'm happy to wake up for and go to work for, is to build stuff. But if I keep growing in that next level, suddenly my job is going to be completely different. It feels like a new job entirely. And then there's another path, which is becoming manager, which people have been asking me for a while. I'm sure a lot of you as well. And that also seems like not what I want to do, because I would like to keep coding as much as possible. So it feels a little terminal for me where I am right now. But maybe it's the structure of this company in particular. Maybe there needs to be another track of like higher IC. I'm not sure. I'm actually curious what you guys think about that. and if you feel the same way.
I think one thing, there's like one question that my manager has talked to me a lot about in this decision path. And he said the hallmark of when you know you're ready to make that transition or capable of making that transition is if you can think of a project that your team launched. And if you ask yourself the question, how would I feel if I launched that feature? Or how would it feel if I enabled my team to launch that feature in which somebody else wrote it? And if you would feel as comfortable feeling good about it, knowing that you didn't actually code it, but you enabled it to happen, then that is at least one step in the right direction. But if you can't answer that question comfortably, then it may not be a comfortable direction for you to move.
Yeah, I guess one of the things I think about when I hear terminal, it sounds not so awesome. So it kind of has like a negative connotation. And I feel like sometimes we get so hung up on like having to be ambitious and go after the next, big title and level. And I remember this whole thing dawning on me for the first time like 2 years ago when I first moved to management. I was reading a lot of management books because that's how I was learning how to be a manager. And one of the books I read was Radical Candor by Kim Scott. And there was this notion she talked about of like rock stars and superstars. And I never knew what this difference was. The way that it was described was rock stars are folks who are the solid foundation at your company. They're like that rock that you can count on. And they're very happy in their current role, executing solidly. You can, you know that they're happy. They're growing their skills, but they're not interested in the next level. And then superstars, on the other hand, they are more on a steeper growth trajectory, and those are the folks who are wanting to think about that next level. But I'm curious, like, what makes us feel like terminal level is a bad thing, right? I don't think there actually is. I actually think we should change the wording for it so that we don't think that. And I even think it's very situational. There's definitely been times in my career where I just wanted to be the rock. I just wanted to come back and contribute the same way I was. This was especially true when I came back from having a baby. I have a 7-year-old son, and so in 2012, I came back from parental leave, 3 months, wonderful time. But I came back to work, and right when I came back, I remember my manager talking about, so what should we do to get you to staff? And she didn't have that conversation with me to say, how are things going? And I didn't even know how to vocalize that I wasn't ready or thinking about that next level, that, hey, I'm okay being at this rock right now. Like, I want to just stay as a senior engineer because I'm trying to figure things out at home. And that was something that I think as managers or as mentors, we want to make sure we're having those conversations and not making people feel like they have to always think about that next level.
I think also one thing I think that's changed over the last few years for me is that I stopped thinking about leveling as a goal and more as a side effect of the work that I'm already doing. So, like I think sometimes, especially more senior engineers come to me and they say, oh, and I say, hey, like, have you thought about, going up for promo? You're doing really well. And they say, oh, what if I start failing at my next level, because I'm not meeting expectations? And I said, well, honestly, like, you would be promoted because you're already doing that work. And so, I think it's I don't know, kind of subtle, but I think thinking about sort of the promotion as a result of the work that you're already doing, rather than like a goal that you're working towards, and then you get there and then something happens. I think it's a much healthier way to think about it. So then for myself, I got promoted a couple times at Pinterest. It was I was doing the work that I thought was important. And I would be doing regardless of whether I was getting promoted or not. I think obviously being promoted is a very, very nice thing. It's a great way to be recognized and rewarded. But I think if I had thought of it backwards and said, what can I do in order to get promoted, then I think it can sort of give you tunnel vision. Instead, I was saying, what are the problems here? How can I solve them? And then, like I said, I think the promotion was a reward for that.
To echo your thoughts on that, I'm involved a lot in the promo committees and the competencies at Uber. And one of the hard requirements we have is that someone had to be operating at that next level across all of our engineering competencies for at least 6 months before they're eligible for that promotion. So that kind of goes exactly to I think the idea of what you were saying.
Yeah, I think the 6-month point is really important. And similar at Twitter, it's just to make sure that it's sustainable. Because sometimes when people are putting in an effort just to get to a promo, they're doing more than what they probably can comfortably do at times. And so they have to also make sure that that's something they want to do for the long term. And it's not just like only in service to getting to that goal. You're signing up for this new type of work at this level for the next X number of years.
So to move the conversation a little bit, we've talked a lot about internal leadership, and a lot of these are big companies. But we're all here at a droidCon. It's the community, and there's a lot of external leadership that can be demonstrated too. How is that different than the leadership we've been talking about already?
So I think we're all very fortunate to be part of this Android community. Many of us picked it explicitly. Many of us wound up here for a variety of paths. But I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about we are in many ways the underdog in a lot of our companies, and it's created this powerful community. And if you want to get involved, like you're already here at this conference, that's great. Talk to people, get to know people. Like there's so many ideas and things to learn. You can definitely learn something fascinating about Android or about someone's personal life from anybody in this conference. And then you can continue that conversation. Personally, I found Twitter to be a very valuable tool. For whatever reason, the Android community on Twitter is great. And there's a lot of people, and even people who you've never met, you can start a conversation. You can ask people questions, and there's just put yourself out there, talk to people, learn, and be willing to recognize that at the end of the day, we're all just people. There's a lot of people who I'm now friends with in the Android community who I was, frankly, kind of intimidated by earlier on, just a few years ago, right? People who contributed to very famous open source libraries or who have a lot of followers on Twitter. And then you meet them often at a conference like this, and you're like, no, just like someone else. You can go up and talk to them, ask them questions, and get to know them. So anyone in this room is capable of that if you're not already there.
I think having that external factor too brings so much back internally as well. I feel like the analogy is maybe like, imagine you're a doctor. You can do your job every day, be a doctor, or you can go a little bit the extra mile, and maybe it comes a little bit from passion or wanting to do your job better, and you want to find what's the new techniques that people are using to make my job better. And what do, right? You go to a conference, you look at Twitter, you see what other people are doing, and that's kind of like that reflex of like looking outside, see what people are doing so that I can do my job better. And I think you need that little attitude too, to be, I want to be better, because maybe you're happy with your current skills and you're doing your features or your development or your CI or whatever, and you're happy with that. But if you have that little spark of curiosity and you wonder how you can do better, going to these conferences, looking at Twitter, that's so valuable. If you start doing that, that's how you become a rock star, really, because you're gonna get all this inspiration from other rock stars all across the world and bring it back to your team and be like, hey, I heard about this, how about we try this? And suddenly you are an influencer in your company because you've heard of all these things that are happening outside. So for me, like the community is key component to be a leader. You can't be a leader if just on your own. Like you can't just come up with these new ideas yourself. You're always inspired by someone else, and that someone else, you meet them at a conference.
You know, I strongly believe that Android as a product would be nowhere where it is today without the community. And that's been acknowledged a lot by the folks working on it outside of Google as well. It's a lot of what it is today is in thanks to our contributors in open source and the feedback that they're getting at conferences and these other things that we're learning. And whether you're a leader externally or at Google or in your own company, I think that it comes with a measure of responsibility as well. And that is that the more people view you as a leader, the more your voice is amplified. And so you need to be responsible with that in what you say, what you represent, how you try to grow the community in a healthy and inclusive way. And I think that that's something that a lot of folks, regardless of if they're an executive at their company or a leader on stage or a large open source contributor, doesn't necessarily keep in mind, but they should. So moving on a little bit, I think at least a few of us here are pretty active in the speaker community. We talked at a lot of conferences, and I thought it'd be fun to kind of talk through maybe what your first conference talk was and how that went, and maybe if you have any tips you could share from that to the audience.
I actually started my Android community journey like very early on. I remember it was I was at an agency in Paris, and one of the guys there, he wasn't actually a pure Android dev, he was web dev, but he was in like a user group as well. And he told me one day like, hey, there must be an Android user group in Paris. And like, I looked it up and it's like, hey, let's go, we'll go together, because I'm curious too. And like, I needed that little first push to actually go to that first meetup. And then I went there, I heard the talk. It was actually, the first talk was by PY 9 years ago, I remember, on Android annotations. And I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. Like, these guys are trying things on their own and all that. And then I came back the week after and the week after. And then I thought, well, maybe I can give a talk. And then I gave a talk. It was just before Cyril Motier, which is also pretty known in the community. And so I talked to this guy, and I suddenly, like, I started to be in the community and started to get invited to conferences. I think, I can't actually remember what my first conference was, but the very first talk was at that Paris Android user group. And that was for me the core of like expanding into starting to know everybody around. And it brought me so much.
I would say my foray into conference speaking was a little bit unconventional because my first conference was Google I/O.
Oh, wow.
So, and that was a byproduct of working on Android Auto. But beyond that, I would say that I did a few smaller conferences after that, and then, but the thing that really stuck with me was I always looked up to droidCon New York, and I put it on a pedestal. I was like, this is the conference where the best speakers speak, and it's like the #1 non-Google Android conference in the world. And I think I applied for a talk several times and got rejected several times, and then eventually I got in. And that's okay. And it was a really powerful moment. And then you wake up, I couldn't sleep the night before, but then you roll out of bed the morning of your first talk and you're like, okay, like this is actually happening. And then it kind of just goes from there. But a few tips I would say is just try. You can start small if you want. You can start at a GDG, and there's so many other random meetups, Android opportunities around your local city or around the world. And if you don't get in, that's completely okay. Everybody gets rejected from conferences sometimes, and getting rejected one year has absolutely no bearing on getting rejected for any other conference or even the same one in the future. So, and frankly, the simple fact of writing up that abstract and submitting something to a call for papers will give you, like, going through the motions, writing your speaker profile, practicing writing a few, and even potentially submitting multiple talks to a conference, which is also okay, is a thing. It's like a muscle that you have to practice, and then you get good at it. And don't be ashamed. Don't let your ego get too bruised when you get rejected. Happens to everyone. Just try again.
Yeah, my first one was at a company at Twitter, and that's where I actually met Chuki. And at that time, I think she was the one who really inspired me to do more of it. And my first one was very intimidating, but it was small and it was more of a safe space to do it. And once I did it one time, it's like, that wasn't so bad. Okay, the next one got a little bit better. And I think that the first major one I had, that was the first one I put a lot of effort into my slides, and I even had a designer on my team help out with it. It was amazing. Those were the only times I had amazing slides. So if you have a designer friend, make sure you really lean on them for that. But it does get a little bit easier, but then there's definitely times where I've also given talks where I was like, oh, that didn't go as well. So it can go up and down too, depending on how often you do it or not do it, out of practice or not. So it does take some practice.
I think I started in 2012 or 2013. My first conference was droidCon UK. It kind of started as a funny story because I was at Evernote and I was talking to our DevRel, who was a friend of mine, and I voiced to him that I would like really long term like to be someone who's like up on stage giving talks, but I was terrified of it and terrified of public speaking. And he pretty much just said, "Great, let's sign you up for some CFPs right now," and just forced me into it. And I was willing to play along, and we submitted some talks, and droidCon UK or London accepted me, and then I had that accountability, right? Like I had to do it. I was committed. My name was on a website, and I spent probably way too much time preparing and going over it and everything else. Finally got there. I was a nervous wreck. Got up on stage. All of a sudden, I realized, hey, I know what I'm talking about. This is stuff that I work on. This isn't so bad. And and there was this like moment of relief where I was like, oh, this. I don't know why I was making a big deal out of this. And then I did a few more and kind of really got the itch for it. And then it became super comfortable. And so I give this advice to a lot of folks when they say, I couldn't do that. It's like, no, you can. You just have to train that muscle, and it gets more comfortable and more comfortable. And I remember this funny moment where I was watching Google I/O videos, I think from 2010 or 2011, and I saw, I think, like Romain up on stage. And I like put him up on a pedestal explicitly. And then I remember like 5 or 6 years later, me and Romain are like at a bar, like the shitty bar in the Mission, having a beer. And I just think back to myself, if I could talk to myself 5 or 6 years ago, this guy who like suffered from imposter syndrome and was like, didn't see himself going anywhere in this industry, and show him where I'm at now, he wouldn't believe it at all. So what I would recommend is push yourself, set up that accountability. If you think you can't do it, or you think it's not for you, or you don't have anything to talk about, I can guarantee that you're wrong, that people would be interested in what you want to talk about, and that you could do it.
And again, yeah, like everyone, we all have a fear of public speaking to a certain extent. And I was actually reading an interesting post by Sam Edwards earlier this week on Twitter, Handstands Sam, if you follow him. And he was talking about a Kotlin talk he was giving fairly recently, where he got something happened, maybe he missed a slide, something, and it kind of threw him off. And he started to have almost like panic attack-like symptoms on stage in the middle of a talk. And so he took a deep breath, and he actually stepped to the side, took a sip of water, and just like kind of calmed down for a few seconds, and then stepped back and resumed his talk. And of course, I mean, that's the kind of experience that's going to really stick in your mind for a long time. After the talk, you're like, I ruined the talk with that 10 seconds that I stepped aside. And yet at the same time, tons of people came up after and were like, that was a great talk. One of the best talks on coroutines, or whatever the topic was. And that's okay. Like, it happens to everybody. And if you think that it might happen to you, don't let that stop you from trying.
And people don't notice those things near as much as you think they do.
Yeah.
But it's funny how it feels like you always need that little external push to actually get out of your comfort zone and actually do it. And then once you're committed, you have to do it. And once you do the talk, and after the talk, there's like that talk high, or like, I did it. People come to you and ask you questions, or that feels so good. And I feel like that's what gets you back. And it's a little addicting, I'd say. Yeah.
Okay. So we've talked a little bit about conference talks, and that's definitely one big part of contributing to the community. But another is building the tech itself. It's the open source community. Do you all have any tips for people that want to start contributing there?
Sure. So I'm the maintainer of Lottie for Android and co-maintainer for Mavericks. And I'll just say that you just kind of do it. Neither project was a direction from above at Airbnb. Lottie was started at a hackathon, and Mavericks was started just from conversations that some of my coworkers had, where we recognized patterns that people were doing over and over again and wanted to simplify it. And I think there are opportunities for tons of new libraries going forward. There'll be a lot next year. I think when Compose comes out, it's going to open a new level of people are going to have ideas for how to build things on top of Compose. So that's going to open new opportunities for more libraries. And so if you want to make a library, just do it. Go ahead, put it out there. One thing to note, though, is that if people use it, you have a responsibility to maintain it. Otherwise, there is kind of the behind-the-scenes part of open source where if people are relying on the thing that you build and it has bugs, they usually don't fix them. They just complain about it. So that also gives you an opportunity to take that one step further. So let's say you're using an open source library that has a bug. or has an API that could be improved. You could file an issue, but even better, put up a PR, actually familiarize yourself with that library. You could not believe how appreciative open source maintainers are of pull requests. It seems a little contrary. You're like, oh, who am I to go and contribute to this library? I'm nobody. They're like this person who's famous in the Android community, but at the same time, you've just saved them hours of their time and made their library better in the process, and familiarize yourself with the code base. So it's kind of a win-win all around. So either go ahead and make it. Do be aware that there are some maintenance overheads to putting it out there, but also feel free to contribute back to anything. Okay, HTTP, Lottie, whatever it is, doesn't matter how big.
One thing to add on to that though is for bug fixes, that's great. If you're going to make a big change, like adding a feature, things like that, it's usually best to put up a proposal first and talk to the author and make sure that's the direction that they want the library to go. Maybe they had already thought about that and they explicitly didn't want to go that direction, or they don't think it makes sense for their project. Then again, maybe they're very excited for you to work on that, but at least having that conversation up front will save you from putting in that effort in something that isn't going to be received well.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, open source, the idea of it is so crazy, you're not driving your car and you're like, gosh, I wish this switch was in a different place, and then you can just move it. I think, we kind of take for granted the fact that there's all of this software that's freely available and you can just dive right into it and see how everything works. So, and the Android open source community in particular, I think is really, really vibrant. And, there are all these huge, industry standard projects that are all completely open source. I mean, obviously the OS as well. So, for myself, then, I think it's similar to what Gabe said, which is, you're using a tool, it does something you don't want it to do, or it does something wrong, and then you just put up a PR and you fix it. And that's actually, in the extreme case, that's how Pinterest came to own KT-Lint, as actually I put up a PR. Stanley eventually reverted it, but I think he at least then knew who I was, and then so when he put up a call saying, hey, I don't have time to take this over, then we jumped on it, and then so now it's a project that we own. And so I think it's just like Gabe said, I think the maintainers and the community, I think they're all they wouldn't be open source projects if they didn't want people to contribute. And so, you see people putting things, fixing typos in READMEs, that's something that you can do, and that's somewhere to start. So, I think like anything, you just start really small and then just kind of build up that confidence, get your name out there, build yourself up as someone who's trustworthy. And then I think when you want to make those big changes, then people will at least kind of understand who you are.
I think another common misconception in the open source community is that each of these major libraries have their own team working on it within their respective companies. In reality, it's usually just 1 or 2 people, and it's also usually maintained on nights and weekends. Even the biggest libraries out there, and I can tell you firsthand, 100% of the work on Lottie is done on nights and weekends across all platforms. And that's actually very contrary to even when people casually talk about it. They're like, oh, what does the Lottie team think about that? I was like, well, I don't know. It's like last night in the shower, I was thinking about this. So something to be mindful of.
Great. Joaquim, did you have anything you wanted to add?
So I wanted to give another perspective too, is for me, I was mostly writing apps and I wanted to build products, right? Stuff that people can use. But sometimes making apps, and you gotta think about the whole experience and everything like that. Sometimes you just want to put something out there that's just a little piece of what you built that you're pretty proud of. And that's kind of the flip side. If you're not really into doing fancy UIs or products and stuff, maybe you're more into building cool little systems or tools and stuff like that. And once you identify one thing that you're well, yeah, that's pretty cool, I'm pretty proud of that, really get it cleaned up. And that also that exercise of thinking people are going to look at that code, so I want to make it really nice and clean. That again is that sense of pride of your craft, right? You're crafting something that you want to put out there for people to look at. And it's huge personal improvement. My first open source library that I put out there, Like I got a lot of enjoyment, even though I prefer doing UI stuff and all that. But I got so much joy at just like having something like really clean that worked and that was like fully fleshed out, and then putting it out there. That felt really good. Even if it's just for yourself and nobody's going to look at it, it still felt good.
Great. And with that, we've gone through all of our questions that we're going to be prompting here, and we now have a little bit of time to take questions from the audience. Say it loudly, please, since we don't have a microphone for you all, and we'll repeat it. Yeah. Yes, over here.
One thing that you guys talked about that really resonated with me was looking for a mentor. I work for a large company with a really small team, and there's no one really above me with Android experience. And the community, I'm from Nashville, Tennessee. It's pretty small. Where should I look for a mentor?
So the question was, in an area where there is no Android people above you, how do you find a mentor? Where should you look?
That's a great question. Yeah, go ahead.
I think it was, almost similar to what Lien said, is that I think there's a lot more in common with other types of software or even other jobs not in Android than we think. I think when you're thinking, I guess, when you're asking yourself sort of like, what do you want out of a mentor? It's probably not like, how do I fix this bug in Fragment Manager? It's how do I have more technical influence over Android, or even how do I have more influence over technology as a whole, right? And those are things that I think are not at all specific to Android. And even I think it especially resonates with myself because I say with great confidence that I am not the best Android engineer at Pinterest. I think that I'm fairly competent. I think I have software engineering experience, and that's what they needed at the time. I think when I took this role on, I surround myself with people who know a lot more about Android than I am. Than I do, and so those are the people that I know that I can rely on. And so I think in the same way, then it's just thinking about the people whose career you admire, or they have a skill that you want, and maybe it's probably not something super Android specific, but it's tech specific, or maybe just being a leader. And I think like Gabe's saying, just going up to them and asking, I think most of the time people will say yes, or be able to direct you to somebody who can help you.
Actually, my first mentor that I popped in my mind when you mentioned it was not an Android guy. It was a kind of hardcore Java guy. Like, he worked at Sun and stuff. And again, like, I admire him for just having so much experience, so much skills. And I learned so much from him, not particularly on Android, but like he, recommended some books to read. He like gave me some methodology, like showed me what was important for him when he tackled the problem, and that gave me so much knowledge. Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? Over here.
What do you do to build remote culture on your teams?
That's a hard one.
Yeah, I could speak to that a bit. We have a few, a sibling team in Russia right now, very talented across the board. And I think there's optimizing for async communication. So making sure that decisions have like a clear place where they're made. And if a decision is made in person, you can recap it on Slack or something like that, just so that they can see it, particularly when there are time zone differences, which is very often the case. Another thing to do is to be very mindful of optimizing processes to take that into account. So in our case, since we have a team in Russia, they're engineers, QA, design, across the board. Every morning when I wake up, there's pull requests, there are Jira tickets, and there's Slack messages. And so I do shift my schedule to the first thing I do that's work-related for the day is try to review their code so that we can get a couple iterations before they go to bed. We try to make sure that all meetings that might overlap with them are done at hours where we just have that much overlap, and just being mindful, making sure that they're included. So For example, we do like sprint review or product or like demos at the end of every sprint, making sure that someone can be advocates for the people who are not there. And so the work can be shown to the company and then made very clear, like, hey, this person built this feature and they're in XYZ. And then there was one more, it will come to me in a second.
I have a good example on like just general culture for people that are remote. So one thing that's hard is usually you have more people on site than the remote people, so they kind of feel a bit left out. One thing that we experimented with is I called it mandatory fun time, and it was every Friday at lunchtime. I put a meeting in for the whole team to like kind of sit down together, and the remote people as well. And I tried to find a game that we could play all together, the remote people and us. I think we had a lot of success with all the Jackbox games. So we did over Hangouts.
Nice.
And so we all connected to the thing, and like it's typical like Pictionary type thing. We laughed a lot, and honestly, just coming out of that hour, just like feeling like we're still one team. I saw conversations on Slack suddenly pop up out of nowhere after that because there's that connection that got created. And if you try to do that every week so that we don't diverge and fall apart like that, I feel like you can create that culture of like we're still one team.
Yeah, the thing that I forgot is if you're remote, make it very easy for people to go and spend time in either direction. And so go and sit in their office for a week or bring them in and just like build that one-on-one in-person relationship, because when you can actually put that face to it, then you have more kinds of conversations and you feel like you're actually connected to them as a team. And it's probably the best investment a company can make in bringing that remote culture.
Yeah.
Yes.
Being a lead, I see one of the questions that I often get asked from the engineering management is the impact on my team and the impact outside my team. Being in a small team, I kind of find opportunities to have some impact outside my team too, and that often shows up in the yearly review cycle. Like, okay, this was your impact outside the team. This was according to the conversation we had. What have been some of the goals that you guys were asked to do, or have you set for the senior lead or junior engineers? Some of the tech goals that you have set for them, if they're not everyone's doing open source or not everyone's doing a blog or everyone's working on impacting outside the art.
So to clarify, the question is, how do we view setting goals for impact and scope outside of your org?
Outside your team.
Outside your team.
Is that like external impact, like conferences and like outside the company, or outside just your team? Okay.
Outside your small team.
So I can take a stab at this. So at Uber, we identify the different levels of engineering, and earlier in the ladder, the folks shouldn't necessarily be having an impact outside of the team. That scope and that impact is kind of expanded as you go up into senior, and then we have a senior 2 where other folks may have staff, and then we go higher and higher along that level past the terminal level. And at each one of those levels, you're talking about like a widening umbrella of the scope. So at the very top, you're having industry impact. You're putting out a bunch of open source stuff that other big companies are adopting. At the very bottom, you have someone who's just implementing a feature spec that's given to them. And I think that sweet spot where a lot of folks fall, at the career or terminal level or above that, is when they're just leading their team and they're cross collaborating with a couple other teams, and they're trying to like push that boundary a little bit. And I think that having an org that explicitly calls that out in their ladder, having that defined in the promo process, having their stakeholders understand that, so that as these engineers are trying to push on, hey, I want to get promoted to staff or whatever that looks like, they can start trying to expand their scope explicitly, and then they have that buy-in from the manager or the director or whoever is going to be really beneficial.
So whenever an Android engineer joins Pinterest, then I'll try to have a one-on-one with them. And the one spiel that I give them is I said that you have about 6 to 9 months after you start Pinterest before you start ignoring all of the stupid things that we do in our code. And so I think that one way I like to think about it is at any, and I think this works at any level, is think of 1 or 2 things that bother you about your job, or that get in the way of you working as fast as you want to. So, you know, and then, you know, try to figure it out and then just go and fix it. Because, you know, if it's bothering you, it's probably bothering 20 other people, but it's just nobody is, you know, has the time or the willingness to go ahead and fix it. And, you know, again, I think that is a lot of sort of how I kind of organically grew my impact. Was, you know, I started out very small, which is, you know, I said, hey, this, you know, we had a linter running on CI and not locally, and it was annoying because you had to wait 10 minutes to, you know, to find out that your linter failed. So then, you know, I made it run locally, and everyone said, yay. And so, you know, that was very small. It was like, you know, a PHP script, I think. And then, you know, I think in another way, I said, hey, you know, the way that we do, you know, that our analytics framework works is really fragile. I would like to rewrite it. And so, you know, I put out a spec, and then, you know, had a bunch of people review it, and then I rewrote it, right? And so I think, you know, it can be something very, very small, or it can, you know, as you get more senior, I think the scope of the things that bother you, I think, become a lot larger. But, you know, I think that's I think, a very easy way to kind of organically impact other people's work, because, you know, like I said, if it's bothering you, I guarantee it's bothering somebody else. So then you can make a really, really small change, and then suddenly 4 or 5 people are, you know, sending you a message saying, thank you so much for, you know, for fixing that. And so I think that's very obvious, you know, when you've done something to make other people's lives easier, then I think it's very easy to demonstrate impact that way.
I think we have time for one more question. Anyone else? Okay, up here in the front.
Which best advice have you ever gotten?
The best advice that we've ever received. What's that?
Like mentoring ones.
The best mentor advice that we've ever had. How about each person try to give an answer to this?
Man, that's a tough one.
This is our last question. We're gonna end on this one, huh?
Yeah, this is a good question to end on.
Man, I don't. That's rough, man. I gotta like go. I feel like I don't know. I don't think there was like one sentence, right? Like I feel like it was a kind of a general like feeling. I feel like the mentorship, you're basically trying to kind of absorb the person's skill, right, and like get their like kind of imitate them or copy them. And it's not like one thing. You kind of observe what they're doing, how they're doing it, and then kind of make your own version of it. So basically, I just try to copy my mentor. Basically, that's what happened. I don't think there was one sentence that came out. At least I can't think of one.
I think I have one. Probably for me was just this notion of like, don't be so hard on yourself. I think it took me a long time to really allow myself to like make more mistakes. I think I also grew up in a culture where it was sort of like you had to do this so perfectly. That's how my parents raised me. So I always had this fear of failure, and that anytime I felt like I failed, then I would really be down on myself for it, and down on myself for it for a long time. And I think when I heard that, it was like, don't be so hard on yourself. I was like, why am I being so different to myself and not being forgiving towards myself the same way I am to other people? Why do other people get to fail and I don't? And then I started thinking about it, I'm like, okay, then I started taking more risks, started being more comfortable in like making decisions and not needing to worry about being so perfect. And the times when I do fail, I time box it, and I can like be mad at myself and beat myself up, but I was like, okay, that's 1 hour where you get to feel crappy, move on. And that's what I do a lot now when I talk to people too. That's sort of like one of my tips I pass on.
One manager I had a very annoying habit, which I have now adopted, which is whenever someone, whenever there's some really big problem or a big bug, or someone said, oh, is it even possible? Can we do this? He would say, it's just software. Of course it's possible. And so, I find myself saying that a lot, which is, I think we're very privileged, I think, to be able to be in this industry where you really get to invent everything. If there's a problem that you don't know how to solve, you can invent a new way to solve it. And I think it's very, very powerful that like almost anything is possible with with the work that we do, which I think is really amazing.
And I would say I already started to touch on the one that stuck with me, but it's the concept of a good manager gets the same satisfaction when their team successfully ships something as they do when they personally ship that thing. And I actually don't think that he meant it to be as profound as I think it could be, because you can have that mentality at any level. And imagine if you're an IC. You should still be able to get satisfaction out of your team successfully shipping something, or one of your coworkers successfully shipping something. And once you adopt that mentality, you realize that every time you help someone, it's better for everybody, because they're gonna feel good, you're gonna feel good, and then the whole team's gonna feel good, and your company's gonna do better. So it's like this enabling function that's like, I just wanna enable everyone to do the best work they can at any level, no matter where I am, and no matter what level they are.
I think for me, it was the concept that was really the epiphany, I think, between what I considered being like a more junior engineer to the space and then a more senior engineer. And I don't know if there was like one tip that kind of led to this, but I did have mentors that tried to push on it. When I was junior, I always had like a strong sense of urgency, and I would couple that with like an extreme like depth and like knowledge in the space. So like I would view having a huge amount of Android knowledge or whatever I was working on as like the pinnacle of seniority. And I viewed myself as a senior engineer because like I knew the most Android. But it wasn't until I really started to use like a prioritization, like have a defined prioritization framework and understand like that sense of urgency didn't necessarily make sense for myself or for other folks in the organization, and be able to apply the like requests and the work and the issues and everything through that system, and really realize that this is our career and things are actually pretty low stakes, and no, I don't have to kill myself for crunch time just because the PM didn't adequately like mention this feature ahead of time or whatever it is, and everything became a lot more chill. And at that point, I think I came to this epiphany of like, oh, I think this is being senior. This is where understanding the actual priority of things, being completely comfortable saying no, and just kind of pushing on that mentality. Cool. Well, with that, thank you all for coming to hear us talk for a long time. And thanks for coming for a great droidCon.